At least 2 people have died in the Philippines, and more than 1 million have been evacuated as another typhoon strikes the country. Super Typhoon Fung-wong made landfall in northern Aurora province, bringing extreme winds and torrential rain. It's expected to be the biggest storm to hit the Philippines this year, surpassing Typhoon Kalmaegi, which killed more than 200 people just days ago.
Fung-wong reached super typhoon status well ahead of its expected landfall. That meant winds of up to 185 kilometers per hour, with some gusts reaching up to 230, were battering the country's northeastern coastal areas, knocking out power lines and forcing around 1 million people to evacuate their homes and seek shelter. Like here in Catanduanes, a small island province right in the storm's path. Further north, in Luzon, the country's largest and most populous island, storm-tested communities were quick to heed evacuation orders.
We heard the news about the strong typhoon, so we decided to evacuate early. Our belongings are already stored at a higher elevation. Some of our belongings are at my wife's aunt's place, while some are on our roof. Whenever there's a typhoon, we often come here to take shelter because we live near a creek. When there's a typhoon, our place gets flooded, and the waters can reach over our heads.
The superstorm, locally known as Uwan, has a radius that spans nearly the entire archipelago that comprises the Philippines. Meteorologists warned the torrential rains were likely to trigger widespread flooding and possible river overflows. The superstorm has forced the government to suspend recovery efforts in the wake of Typhoon Kalmaegi, which left more than 200 people dead just days ago.
Jhesset Enano is a freelance journalist originally from Manila but now based in London. Her reports focus on climate change and environmental issues. Good to have you with us. So as we've been reporting, this is, of course, the second devastating storm to hit the Philippines recently, and there were hundreds of people killed in the previous storm. Why is the Philippines so vulnerable to major weather events like this?
Well, the Philippines is geographically positioned in the path of storms that really are born in the Pacific Ocean. But the vulnerability of Filipinos and generally the entire population is really compounded by poverty, which affects the people's capacity to be able to adapt to these increasingly intense and more frequent typhoons and to be able to build their resiliency. We can think of it that when people are trying to just get back on their feet, another storm will come in, and that would really massively affect their capacity to recover from the impacts of what we've been seeing as heavy rainfall, landslides, mudslides, and flooding. While not all extreme weather events, of course, can be immediately attributed to climate change, the latest attribution science already shows us that anthropogenic climate change can result and is already resulting to the increased frequency of these storms. So basically what it tells us is these things are not new, and we could expect more super typhoons potentially to be hitting countries like the Philippines in the future. And I guess it's also really critical to consider all of these taking place in the context of COP30, which is beginning this week in Brazil. And countries will once again sit on the table to discuss how we can address the worsening climate crisis. What is happening in the Philippines should really be a strong eye-opener that the impacts of the climate crisis, they are not a faraway problem. They are very much a live reality for many communities, particularly in the global south like the Philippines, that have contributed less to this global problem.
Well, as you mentioned, this is not new to the Philippines. So is the government taking steps to better protect those communities who are in particularly flood-prone areas? What are they doing?
Right. Well, unfortunately, the past few months, we have been seeing and hearing a lot of inquiries of blatant and widespread displays of corruption that have been linked to flood control projects in the country. We have been seeing billions of pesos that should have been poured into these projects that have either not been completed or of substandard quality. So while the government is, of course, taking steps to protect Filipinos during the times of these typhoons by leading these evacuation efforts, making sure that people are in safer places or evacuation centers during the time that the typhoon hits. The fact that flood control projects have failed the Philippines and are continuing to fail Filipinos is really just an irony in the context of the knowledge that climate change will continue to have these devastating impacts on Filipinos. And in the broader context, what this really just reveals is that the costs of corruption and of these failed projects is not really just the money, the taxpayers' money of Filipinos, but really it costs actual lives. When we consider it in the context of the impacts of the climate crisis, corruption is very much killing vulnerable people who should have been protected by these flood control projects. So while we want Filipinos to become more supported, to have better capacity to adapt to these storms, we need to be able to demand accountability from the government to protect us in the context of more worsening storms that we will be seeing not in the very far future, but in the short term for sure.
That was journalist Jhesset Enano reporting. Thank you so much.
Mage is a journalist based in the Philippines capital, Manila, and she gave us this update on the impact of the super typhoon.
Well, Super Typhoon Fung-wong, or locally known as Uwan, has made landfall in the province of Aurora, northeast of the Philippines at more than 185 kilometers per hour. Local news have reported severe flooding caused by storm surges as high as 3 meters have been lashing on seawalls along the coastlines. We could see debris, houses being swept, and boats being dragged out from the shorelines. Here in Metro Manila, there have been forced evacuations done to residents beside creeks and rivers that could potentially wash out their homes from flash floods and landslides. We have had 2 power outages already tonight so far. We can hear the strong winds outside now as Fung-wong traverses northern Philippines at the moment.
Journalist Mage there reporting from Manila.